Next up, we have Aleister Freeman. He is the CEO of Freshtech Africa. He is a qualified chartered accountant and a highly skilled and experienced project manager, in excess of 7 years specific experience in deploying large projects focused on customer experience. He's been actively deploying and supporting Freshworks products for over 8 years. He has extensive technical knowledge and experience in deploying complex customer requirements. Welcome, Alistair.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thanks very much, and welcome to those that are attending. Let me just share my screen quickly. Fantastic. Okay. Thanks very much, Adam. So yes, my name's Alistair, like Adam said, and I head up the South African business of Freshworks. And this afternoon, I'm going to attempt to not focus on product. I'm going to really, my experience and what I want to talk about today is really the experience and what I've gleaned over probably in excess of 150 deployments over about 8.5 years. I really understand Omnichannel, and I come from a project management background, like Adam said. So there's a lot I've learned in terms of what works well, what doesn't work well, and at this point I can also tell, what people love, all the shiny stuff around bots, and what they need to sort of kind of stay away from, and what's practical to deploy and not. So that's what I'm going to try and focus on today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me or raise your hand at any point in time. So I'm going to break this session into three pieces. I'm going to talk about how would you look at purchasing the right bit of software, and it's going to sound quite strange coming from someone who's completely aligned with Freshworks, but I'll do my best to be completely independent on this and give you some sort of insight on what you should look at, not just functional stuff, but practical stuff around this. Also look at, once you've made your decision, what you should do from a sort of deployment perspective and things you need to consider at a project time. And then I'll also touch on the man of the hour around bots and my thoughts around that. So let's just start with the world that we're currently dealing with in the digital space. So you're obviously dealing with multiple different touch points, either on a sales or marketing or a customer service journey. And what you're essentially trying to achieve is to consolidate this into a single space. And what we call, essentially from a customer service perspective, which is what I'm going to focus on today, you're going to be looking at what's called Omnichannel. And Omnichannel is essentially, what it means is journey. It's, can you expose to the agent who's dealing with a customer across one of these digital channels, can they get an immediate view of the customer's journey to the point where they started dealing with them? What it really speaks to is context. Give the agent a contextual understanding of all the different touch points in that sort of spider diagram that I showed you. And that's really what you're looking at. So when you're looking at a piece of software, make sure that the essence that it does that really well. Put yourself in the shoes of the agent who's going to be dealing with these kind of things, and make sure that it's easy for them to see that context. If they don't get that context and they have to kind of jump between screens, then it's really not giving you what you want. Next piece I want to talk about is the concept of single screen. And these are just things that have come to mind over the last couple of days when I thought about what you should look at. And for me, the concept of single screen is really trying to put as much on the screen in front of the agent when they're dealing with service requests. So in the middle there, you can see what we call a classic journey. So the journey is showing you, they contacted me on Twitter, they contacted me on Facebook, they sent me an email, they called me. But you can also ingest other information. So when did they make an order? When did their order get delivered? Whatever will give the agent context so they don't have to hop the screen and go look somewhere else is what you want to put on here. You can also include previous order details. You can put customer sentiment. You can put things like what their birthday is or what they like to purchase. On the left-hand side, you can, more details are in the customer, maybe customer numbers. What you want to put on there is as much information that prevents the agent from continuously jumping into a transactional system to do the necessary research. Next thing you want to look at is, when you're looking at a vendor, for me, is do a proper deep dive, like do a POC, spend some real time up front, like identifying what your success criteria is. So your vision. If you don't know what your vision should be, then get some advice from a consultant or speak to it's hard to speak to vendors, but I'm saying, speak to someone independent, might give you some advice, but know what you're aiming for and do a proper POC. Ask to look at local deployments. I mean, I'm a vendor. There's so many vendors out there. You can't make a decision on a desktop exercise. Go and see some live deployments. There's many deployments of this in the country. So, really just try and test out what the vendors are telling you and make sure that it's actually out there in full view and actually being used. Look at what's available in box, or in other words, it's basically easily configurable at the time you're doing a POC, but also look at what is outside. What can't the system do out of the box? And we typically call this, where do we need to build you a custom application? In most cases, in sort of 95% of the time, we cover everything you need, but there are certain instances. So again, just find out what can be done in the beginning and what needs a little bit of custom development. It's not usually a big piece, but just make sure you understand that. The next thing I want to talk about is the concept of future-proofing the vendor that you ultimately go with. And I think this is a really important aspect, and I'm going to sort of overlay that with why I believe you should be going with a vendor that does everything. What I'm basically trying to say here is that if you are looking at an omni-channel solution and your current digital channels on the left-hand side of the diagram is maybe just email and telephony, and maybe you've got a bit of chat. If that's what you're just focusing on right now, then that's great. But my honest view is that further down the line, if you might look at WhatsApp bots, if you might look at WhatsApp, if you might look at social media in a bit more importance than it is now, and in-app support, whatever the case is, if you're going to grow those digital channels and you're going to want to have a full omnichannel view at some point, make sure that the vendor that you choose now can cater for that later. There are many very good vendors in chat, very good email ticketing systems, whatever the case is. But what I'm saying is future-proof it, because what you don't want is to end up in a few years' time with multiple different vendors that are really good at individually dealing with certain channels, but you have to kind of strap them together. I can promise you, you're going to never get it right. And as much as each of these systems have APIs, you're never going to achieve what someone like a Freshworks did in 10 years. Like, you're not going to get it done in a year. It's not going to happen. So go that route, in my opinion. I think it makes a huge amount of sense also for you when you're dealing with everything in one place, from simple things like reporting. You can see your entire organization from one place. You're not sort of consolidating from different systems and then reporting it via Power BI. The other big piece, which is often never really appreciated, is this concept of sort of omni-channel enablement. And what I'm basically saying here, and I don't know if it's probably only makes sense to me, but essentially what I'm saying is that when you're in a traditional environment, let's assume you have 1,000 agents, and 600 of those are doing telephony, and 200 of those are doing email, and 100 of those are doing chat, or whatever the case is. In a traditional environment, they were just managing those areas. Now suddenly everyone's working on exactly the same platform. What it gives you is the ability to start seeing across the board where you have capacity, and I guarantee you have capacity. And now you can make the telephone guys start responding to chats, the email guys start responding to social media, whatever the case is. What you will definitely find over time, and I typically see this after a couple of months of deployment, is that these questions start being asked, and the questions are not a bad thing. In the longer term, you're definitely going to have a reduction in staff because these kind of tools are just so much more efficient. But what you're seeing is that you're starting to use your staff much better than you did before. So just make sure. So that's really why I would pitch for something that kind of does it. And honestly, there's a lot of vendors that can do it for you. Local support and advice. Look, I'm not trying to pitch myself here, but I can't tell you how valuable this is when you start to get to larger deployments. When you're in a small business and you've got a small team of, say, 10 people, going for a SaaS product and dealing with sort of online support, that's absolutely fine. When you start dealing with much larger deployments, 60 seats, 100 seats and above, you really need to make sure you get some advice on someone who knows how to do this and understands the software that you've chosen. So, whether it's the vendor who can provide that support or some sort of independent consultant, that's who honestly, my point is, get that advice. So in summary, the key things for me when you're choosing software around, make sure you're going for a Gartner grade solution, and make sure you can get that local support or certainly some sort of consultant advice on that. Obvious things like open APIs. When you're doing your POC, make sure that they can cater for what you're wanting to do. Data protection, a big consideration from a POPI perspective. Make sure where your data is hosted. If your vendor can't host in South Africa or can't host in the EU, many vendors only host in the US. I'm not a lawyer, but from the advice I've got, I would highly advise you to get your advice, is that it will not be POPI compliant. So seriously consider that. Look at the admin interface, and this is the back end of the tool, and make sure that it is easy to understand. And this really speaks to the longer term vision, where these kind of tools, these kind of software tools that I suggest you go with, you can self-maintain. What I'm saying is, you really shouldn't be doing what happened in the 90s, where you're completely reliant on third parties to update your system. Once you've gone live, you're going to have changes, and make sure that you're self-reliant is my point. On the user side, what's so important, and again, when you're doing these kind of comparisons that are on a sort of a desktop basis, all the functionality is going to be listed side by side, because the top vendors can pretty much do everything that everyone else can do. The point is look at things like user interface. Look at how easy it is. Look at look at how much time the vendors invested in things like in design. So it's simply, does it work, and is it seamless work like an Apple does compared to, say, some of the lesser known sort of mobile brands. That's what I'm kind of getting at. When you have a large support team, those kind of things really, really do make difference, and test that as part of your seat. Look at the intuitiveness of the tool that you're looking at. I'll touch on this a bit later when I start talking about things like bots, but make an assessment, even if you're not looking at orchestration and some sort of reflection. Now look at the capabilities of that tool. So how do they deal with things like FAQs? How do they deal with knowledge? Do they have things like email triage bots? How do they have orchestration capabilities built into the tool so you can build these bots yourself? I think those are really important things. Reporting. Everyone wants to talk about reporting, and I'm just reiterating the obvious here. If you ever have to look at a vendor that doesn't allow you to have like sort of full Power BI capabilities inside the tool, then you're looking at the wrong tool. You should never have to export data. You should be able to schedule reports. In fact, the way to look at it is every single digital property inside the tool, whether it's time-based or type of complaint or anything, you should be able to report on and be able to create custom reports on. And like I said, most of the top vendors can do that. Last thing I want to talk about is the question of collaboration. So when you're licensing and you're looking at a product, let's just take an example. Let's assume you're a 500 size business. You've got a help desk of 20 people and you're serving a customer base of 10,000 people. The reality is that that customer service team of 20 people is going to have to collaborate with third parties, specifically in the e-commerce space, with delivery, and it's going to have to collaborate with other stakeholders in the business. Understand what collaboration capabilities they have and understand if it's an add-on cost or not, because the ability to collaborate around solving a customer's thing is a company-wide issue, and make sure that the software can deal with that. Okay, at this point, you've made, if I just move on to the next slide over here, at this point, you've made the decision on what you're looking at from a vendor. What are the things that you want to consider at time of deployment or just prior to deployment? So makeup of your team, obvious things, that you've got a proper mix of business representation, a project in large deployments that you've got, the appropriate project management around that. For me, the most important thing though is the administrator. The administrator is the person who's going to deal with the back end of the tool. Make sure they're involved from the beginning of the deployment. So when the go live happens, they fully understand exactly what was done. The point is, and this speaks to what I spoke about earlier, they need to be able to understand if changes need to happen on the Monday after go live, that they know how the tool is set up and how to make those changes. Also, just some things to point out, and I've seen this happen too many times, is make sure you've got more than one administrator. Don't have too many, but don't just have one. I've seen many instances where the one person deploys the product, they know what they're doing, they become sort of the in-house genius on this. 1 year later, they leave the organization. No one has any idea how to use the tool. So these are obvious things, but just don't make these mistakes. I'm going to repeat, get some advice around doing these things properly. Again, if you're looking at deploying anything more than 50 seats, you're likely to need some sort of complex workflows. Just, there's a lot of consultants out there that understand the products, that understand the space, agnostic of what vendor you're using. Get their advice on best ways to do this. It's like any software. When there's so many features available, you want someone to tell you, look, this is the best way to do it. This is how I would look at it. This is how I would do it across brands. This is how I would group it across the entire organization, things like that. What I spoke about earlier was that when I spoke about Omni enablement, I always think it's a really good idea, like soon after go live, to test out that sort of proper omni-channel. So in other words, if you're faced with a situation where you still have, sort of siloed sort of teams, try and segment a certain area and put certain people into sort of an omni-channel team where you can test out those capabilities. It'll definitely change the nature of the kind of people that you hire over time. Telephony. Telephony is always an outlier, and I always find it, typically in these very large deployments, and I've done a lot of them, it's a pain. If your telephony provider is already integrated into the platform that you choose, then you have no problems. If they're not, there's going to be a lot of development, and don't let anyone tell you that it's not going to be complicated. It's typically complicated. It's not complicated. You need skilled staff to do it, but it always seems to take time. So just bear that in mind. Training, obvious, but I've just seen it too many times where customers go live without proper training. They end up doing what, they never really understand exactly what the capabilities are of the tool. And it's most important for management and supervisor level. Understanding how to utilize the tool to manage your teams, particularly in a cloud-based environment. There's so many features across all the different vendors that help and are designed specifically for that. Unless somebody shows you or you pick it up at time, I've just seen people just kind of do things manually like they did before. And I think that's an important item to consider. The next piece I want to talk about is this whole piece around bots. And I'm a fan of bots, so I'm not going to come across too negatively about this, but my point is I've seen too many people jump into bots for the sake of having a bot. Bots are practical and they make a lot of sense, but only in certain situations. If you have very high volumes and you're unable to cope with that, and in other words, you don't have enough capacity, then absolutely consider bots. But bots make sense in those situations only if a large portion of those volumes are highly repetitive tasks. And if those tasks can be achieved via API and still improve the customer service, or at least maintain that customer service. So, I mean, those are like, it's a whole lot of words there, but in simple terms, don't just build something because the sake of maybe everyone's got a bot. I've seen so many bots built recently. Some parts of the bots are great, but a lot of it is just so painful. I don't know why people even bother doing it. There's also a lot of talk around AI, around bots. Honestly, it's like a big shiny thing that all vendors hang out there. Like, there is AI, but there's a huge amount of intelligence that sits below that AI around the data. And unless you have the appropriate data, you're going to battle to get proper AI capabilities, is the truth around this. So don't ignore it. And I'll talk about that a bit later, but it's not just a plug and play from an AI perspective. Don't start with conversational bots. So again, there's a lot of players who can purport to have a freely speaking bot to replace a human. Humans are really good at being humans. So don't try and replace us. Replace us where the tasks are repetitive, but make sure that if you ever put someone into a bot cycle, make sure they can get out of it. I had a really, really good use case the other day. I used Google Workspace, and I had an accounting issue that I needed to get sorted out, and I went on to chat. For some reason, I always use chat. I literally sat on it for about 5-10 minutes, and I never got out of this answer bot flow. It never answered my question, and I could never speak to an agent. So my point is, like, if it's going to almost, yes, it deflected me, but it frustrated me so much. And unfortunately, it's Google. I can't ever leave them. But if I was a customer of someone else and I could leave, I literally would. So it's so important that you understand and you appreciate what you're trying to achieve, by looking at these bots. So let's just look at some of the sort of key bots which I like and I think make a lot of sense. And I just want to just start by talking a little bit about WhatsApp, because it's kind of talked about a lot and there's a lot of it happening now. And I'm not going to talk about how to do it, but there's some key considerations that you may or may not know, and it's really important that you understand these. If you're not aware, there's this concept of the 24-hour rule. You can contact me afterwards if some of these things are not clear, but there's this concept of a 24-hour rule where you can't respond to customers after 24 hours. Currently, you can't port numbers from one vendor to the other. Very recently, I heard that you can start doing it. I've never tested it, but up until now, it hasn't been able to be done. So take it as it can't be done at the moment. When you deploy something like a WhatsApp bot, I always highly suggest getting a second number that you use for internal use. Use that as a way to test it. So most of the products allow you to build these bots in-house. In fact, that's one of the things that when you look at a bot provider or a vendor that can do bots, make sure you can build these bots yourself. Again, don't become reliant on a third party to do this. Absolutely no reason to do it. These bots are sort of drop and drag. If you invest in the technology, invest in the in-house skills to be able to maintain this yourself in-house. But like back to the WhatsApp piece, just make sure you understand what those key aspects. The marketing side, I often get asked about sending marketing slides, and I've seen people send out marketing stuff, and I don't know how they get away with it. But certainly the black and white from Facebook is that you can't do it. So I don't know how they're going to regulate it, but right now you're unable to do it. There are very strict controls about what you can send out in terms of what's called proactive messaging, and again, I can talk about that. So what do I like? Which bots do I think make a lot of sense? So there are two sides to the bots. One is on the agent side, and these are kind of orchestration bots. They're sitting inside the interface. When I spoke about that single screen, this is when an agent needs to orchestrate something. So send a statement, check on an order. These are flows where they can type into sort of an agent side facing bot, and it'll orchestrate, it'll do something for them via API, so they don't have to leave the screen. What I think is even better, and I've seen this work really, really well, and this is where AI does work well, is when you've got an underlying data pool, and you need a lot of data around this, and serves. So when an agent, when Alistair sends in a request, it will automatically sort of respond with sort of next best actions. It's almost solving the problem. It's identifying flags, payment flags. It's identifying delivery problems, and it's exposing that to the agent, so they don't even have to research what the problem is. That really, really works well, but you're going to need to invest in people like data scientists, people to understand the data. That's my point. AI works, but you need to work the underlying data properly. Pop-up chats or proactive chats, that works really well in e-commerce. And I've seen these deployed really, really well. So these are when I'm sitting on a cart and I've been there for too long, a chat will pop up and kind of give me a sort of a discount voucher, or it will look at me as a new customer and give me a discount code to try and get me to close. Or I've been sitting on a page too long, it'll pop up and say, can I help you? Those kind of sort of proactive reach outs make a lot of sense. Answer bots, email triage bots, anything is kind of anything where you're just creating a bot and sort of serving back answers. Those are super, super, super easy to deploy. easy to set up, but like my Google bot example, make sure that you can get out of that loop. Otherwise, you're just going to frustrate customers to the end. And make it clear what you can do. I mean, my overall point around bots, I think this is where a lot of people make mistakes, is like give them options, give them the option to speak to an agent, or at least give them an option. And in fact, no, that's not a good idea. Let them at least try and get answers by the self-service, but allow them to hand off. Where you go to my next point, which is transactional bots. This is where I really like bots. And this is where you predefine the things that I do well. Press 1 for this, press 2 for this, press 3 for this. You know, order management, order tracking, returns, refunds, find a store, find promotions. Those things really, really work well. I'm almost out of time here, but my ending statement around bots is quite simply this, is like, just go back to the basic premise of why you need it. Like, does it improve the customer experience, and does it help you with internal capacity problems? If it achieves one of those things, then it absolutely makes sense. Be very careful around things like answer bots. Definitely stay away from conversational bots for now. I've just seen too many of them go bad. They're not difficult to do, but you need a lot of maintenance around them. That's all for me right now. I've kind of flown through that. If there's any questions, I'm just going to pause there. If there's any questions that anyone wants to ask, please feel free. I recognize it's late in the day, but please feel free to ask any questions.